Imagine being just 14 years old, finally finding a school where you feel safe, where you actually pass classes for the first time since second grade, and where you finally have friends. Now, imagine your own mother demanding you leave that life behind, not because it's best for you, but because she needs your choice to fund her own. When I said no, she cut me off completely. So, am I the villain in my own story? I was 11 when my parents' marriage finally cracked all the way through, splitting my life like a plate dropped onto the kitchen floor. It had been wobbling for years, raised voices drifting through closed doors, nights when my dad didn't come home until long after I'd gone to bed, mornings when my mum's eyes looked puffy and red though she smiled as if nothing had happened. When they told me they were divorcing, it wasn't a surprise. It was more like the last gust of wind knocking down a tree that had been leaning for years. I sat at the dining room table when they broke the news, my hands gripping the edge of my chair. My mum's voice was careful, like she was tiptoeing on ice. My dad kept clearing his throat. They said words like different paths, and amicable, and this is not your fault. I nodded like I understood. But what I really understood was the way my stomach dropped and the way my heart started racing. I stared at the salt shaker and wondered how you were supposed to breathe when everything you knew was being rearranged without your permission. A few days later, my mum packed boxes in the living room. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, watching her fold sweaters. The air smelled like cardboard and dust. She told me she'd be moving in with her sister aunt, Caroline, in another state for a while. Her voice was breezy, but her hands were shaking. She said she'd call me all the time. She said we'd visit on holidays. I nodded again, hugging my knees to my chest, not sure what to say. My dad, meanwhile, was making his own plans. Before the divorce was even final, he had enrolled me in a boarding school for middle school instead of sending me to the regular public school. It's one of the best in the state, he said. Like that explained everything. I remember the thick packet of brochures he handed me. Pictures of smiling kids on manicured lawns, classrooms with bright windows. The word boarding scared me at first. It sounded like being locked away. But then he explained how many support systems they had. Therapists, counselors, small class sizes, tutors. 30% of the students have some type of learning difference, he said. You won't be the odd one out. That part made my heart jump. At my old school, I always felt like the odd one out. I had autism and ADHD, and even though I knew a lot of the material, I'd failed classes because I couldn't keep up with the way they taught. I couldn't sit still, couldn't organize my assignments, couldn't stop myself from blurting out answers when I wasn't supposed to. Teachers sighed when they looked at me. Kids whispered. I ate lunch alone a lot. Boarding school felt like a risk, but also like a chance. Still, my mum didn't see it that way. She cornered me one evening while she was filling out change of address forms and said, "Honey, I need you to tell your dad and his lawyer that you don't want to go to that school. Tell them you want to live with me." Her tone wasn't a request. It was a plea wrapped in urgency. I stared at her, confused. "But I do want to go to the school." Her lips pressed into a line. "Sweetheart, listen to me. I signed a prenup. That means I don't get the house or the money. The only way I can get child support is if you live with me. If you tell them you want to come with me, I can afford a place for us. Otherwise," she trailed off and shook her head. "Otherwise I can't." I didn't understand all the legal stuff, but I understood enough to know that she needed me like a key to unlock money. I also knew that for once I wanted something for myself. I wanted to go to that school. I really want to go, I said softly. I like the idea of it. She blinked at me as if I'd betrayed her. You're choosing him over me, she said finally. No, I said, tears burning my eyes. I'm choosing school. She didn't say anything after that. She zipped up another suitcase and moved away without looking at me. When she left for Aunt Caroline's, she didn't hug me goodbye. She just said, I'll call you soon. The front door clicked shut and I stood in the hallway feeling like the air had been sucked out of the house. But days passed and no calls came. My dad asked her about visits, but she didn't answer his emails. I started at my new school that fall, carrying the weight of her absence like a stone in my backpack. The campus was sprawling and green, with old brick buildings and tall trees. My dorm room was small but bright, with a window overlooking a courtyard. The first night I unpacked my clothes into the wooden dresser and set my stuffed fox, worn from years of clutching, on the pillow. I'd never lived away from home before. That first week was a blur of new schedules and faces, but also of something else, relief. Nobody rolled their eyes when I needed instructions repeated. Nobody sighed when I got distracted. The teachers were patient. The other students, well, they weren't saints, but a lot of them understood. When 30% of your classmates also have some kind of learning difference, nobody gets labeled as the weird one. For the first time since second grade, I didn't fail. Sixth grade ended with passing grades across the board, even in math, my worst subject. I remember sitting on my bed with my report card spread out in front of me, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I also made friends. Real friends. Kids who didn't look at me like I was a burden. We played card games in the lounge, stayed up late whispering about teachers, painted our nails wild colors before dorm inspections. I went to therapy and group sessions, too, where we sat in circles and talked about things we'd never said out loud. The counselors taught me how to organize my assignments, how to break tasks into pieces, how to breathe through the moments when my brain wanted to explode. Slowly, I began to feel like maybe I wasn't broken after all. Meanwhile, my dad did his best to stay close. He rented an apartment near the school so he could visit me on weekends. Sometimes he took me to the park or a movie. Sometimes we just sat in the apartment eating pizza and watching TV when he couldn't come. My old nanny drove up to see me instead. There was always someone showing up for me, but my mum still didn't. It was a full year before she called. I remember because it was a Saturday morning and I was sitting on my bed braiding a friend's hair. My phone buzzed and her name popped up. My stomach flipped. I stepped into the hallway to answer. Her voice was brisk. I can't stay with Caroline anymore, she said, without even saying hello. I need you to ask your dad if I can use the apartment. I blinked. What? I'll take the apartment, she said. You can stay with me there, and we'll enroll you as a day student instead of boarding. It'll be fine. I felt my throat tighten. But I like living here, I said. I don't want to change. You can still live there, she said, her tone sharpening. We can work something out. You can see me on weekends instead of him. The words made my chest hurt. But Dad uses the apartment to see me on weekends, I said. I don't want to stop seeing him. Silence then. Fine, she said flatly. Forget it. The line went dead after that. She went back to not talking to me. Sometimes I lay awake at night in my dorm bed thinking about her, about the way she'd looked when she asked me to live with her, about the bitterness in her voice when I said no. I wondered if she thought I didn't love her. I wondered if she loved me. I wondered if she'd ever call again. But mostly, I thought about how, for once in my life, I'd chosen what I needed over what someone else demanded. And even though it hurt, I didn't regret it. When I first arrived at the boarding school, I carried 2 suitcases and a nervous heart. The drive from my dad's house had been quiet, except for the sound of the highway beneath the tires. He tried to fill the silence with stories about how he used to play basketball in college and how proud he was of me for starting this new chapter. I nodded along, clutching my stuffed fox in my lap. The closer we got, the more my stomach churned. The gates loomed up ahead, wrought iron painted black, with the school crest at the center an open book surrounded by a ring of stars. Beyond it stretched a long driveway lined with maple trees turning red and gold in the fall sunlight. Students rolled suitcases up the path. Parents carried boxes. The air buzzed with voices. My dorm was in a building called Willow Hall. Inside, the hallways smelled like lemon cleaner and new paint. My room had 2 twin beds, 2 desks, and 1 window with a view of the courtyard fountain. My roommate Donnie was already there unpacking her clothes. She had short curly hair and a bright green hoodie. "Hi," she said, grinning. "You're my roommate." "Yes," I said softly. "That's cool. I have ADHD." Her bluntness made me blink. "Yeah, and autism. Me too," she said, like she was telling me the time of day. Then she pointed to her side of the room. "I like to keep my stuff in boxes. It helps me feel less overwhelmed." I like lists," I said. "Awesome. We'll get along." And just like that, I had a roommate who didn't think I was weird. The first week was orientation. We had tours of the campus, icebreaker games, and meetings with our advisors. There was a schedule for everything, which helped calm my brain. The cafeteria served meals buffet style, and there were quiet tables for students who didn't like noise. The library had beanbag chairs. The classrooms had soft lighting. Everywhere I looked, there were little adjustments that made life easier, like someone had thought about kids like me when they designed it. Even though I still felt shy, I didn't feel invisible by the time classes started. I was already spending afternoons with a small group of kids who liked drawing and reading. We sat under the big oak tree behind the science building, trading snacks and sketching comics in our notebooks. Nobody laughed when I stimmed by flapping my hands. Nobody rolled their eyes when I lost my train of thought mid-sentence. They just waited. In the evenings, we had mandatory study hall in the dorm lounge. At first, I hated the idea of sitting still for 2 hours. But the school had focus coaches who walked around and helped students break assignments into smaller parts. One of them, Ms. Bennett, sat with me during the first week and taught me how to use a timer, 20 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break. It sounded simple, but it changed everything. By October, my grades were climbing. I wasn't failing math anymore. I wrote my first essay without crying. When my progress report came, I showed it to my dad during a weekend visit, and his eyes got shiny. "Look at you," he said, hugging me. "I'm so proud." He'd rented the apartment, a few blocks away small, with 1 bedroom and a pull-out couch, but it felt like a home base. On Fridays, after school, he'd pick me up and we'd walk there together. Sometimes we'd cook spaghetti. Sometimes we'd watch old movies. Sometimes he'd just sit and listen while I ranted about my week. He didn't always know what to say, but he showed up. When he couldn't, my old nanny Rosa drove up instead. She'd been with me since I was 4, And she still remembered exactly how I liked my grilled cheese cut. She kept a deck of Uno cards in her purse for when I needed distraction. She was my anchor when my dad had to travel for work. In the background of all this, my mum's silence stretched. At first, I checked my phone constantly, hoping she'd text. I told myself she was busy, or tired, or that Aunt Caroline's house didn't have good reception. But as weeks turned into months, the hope dulled. Sometimes in therapy group, I talked about it. She asked me to live with her, I'd say, but I wanted to stay here. Now she doesn't talk to me. The other kids nodded. Some of them had parents who had left, too. It's not your fault, one boy said once. Sometimes adults make their problems your problem. That stuck with me by the end of 6th grade. My report card was full of passing grades. It was the first time since 2nd grade I'd seen something like that. I laid it on my dorm bed and stared at it. Donnie came in and saw me. "You did it," she said, grinning. We celebrated with vending machine candy. My confidence grew piece by piece. I joined the art club. I signed up for swimming. I volunteered to help organize the school library. Every step felt like reclaiming some part of myself I'd lost at my old school. But the more I built this life, the more I felt the gap with my mom. I didn't stop loving her, but I stopped expecting her. Then came the call. It was a Saturday morning, grey and rainy. I was in the dorm lounge, working on a collage when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't recognize the number. When I answered and heard her voice, my stomach flipped. "I can't stay with Caroline anymore," she said, like we'd spoken yesterday instead of months ago. "I need you to ask your dad if I can use the apartment." Her tone wasn't warm. It was businesslike, edged with frustration. I blinked, staring at the glue stick in my hand. "The apartment? Yes, I'll take it. You can stay with me there, and we'll enroll you as a day student instead of boarding." I like living here," I said, my voice small. "You can still live there," she snapped. "We can work something out. You can see me on weekends instead of him." The words echoed. She wasn't asking if I wanted that, she was telling me what I should want. "But Dad uses the apartment to see me on weekends," I said. "I don't want to stop seeing him." Silence crackled on the line. Then she said, "Fine, forget it." Her voice was flat, brittle. "I thought you cared about me." "I do," I whispered. But the line was already dead. I sat there holding my phone, my collage forgotten. After that, she went back to silence. No calls, no texts, no visits. I told my dad what had happened. He frowned but didn't say much. "You're not responsible for her housing," he said gently. "You're allowed to want what you want." But even as he said it, guilt gnawed at me. At night, I lay awake in my dorm bed and replayed the conversation. Should I have said yes? Should I have asked him? Was I selfish? Was I a bad daughter? Yet every time I pictured giving up the apartment visits with my dad, every time I pictured losing the stability I'd finally found, my chest tightened. This school was my home now. It was where I'd learned to stand up on my own shaky legs. Sometimes, in therapy, I practiced saying it out loud. I'm allowed to choose what's best for me. It felt like trying on clothes that didn't fit yet. But slowly, it started to feel truer. The weeks after that phone call felt like moving through fog. Everything around me, the classes, the activities, the chatter in the dorm kept moving forward, but a heavy quiet settled over me at night. I still got up for swim practice, still sat under the oak tree with my friends, still worked on my art projects. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, though, I kept replaying my mom's voice, sharp and brittle, echoing in my ear. I thought you cared about me. The guilt came in waves. Sometimes it crashed over me when I was supposed to be focusing on a math problem. Sometimes it crept up when I was laughing with Donnie about something silly. It whispered, maybe you should have asked your dad. Maybe you should have said yes. Maybe she's right here, choosing him over her. But then there were the moments when I remembered why I'd said no. Sitting in the quiet library with my homework spread out in neat piles, getting my first A on an essay, walking with my dad to the little apartment, our breath making clouds in the winter air, Rosa showing up with a thermos of soup when I had the flu. All of it steady, consistent, a kind of care I could count on. Therapy helped me sort through it. In group, we sat in our circle of mismatched chairs, our counselor Ms. Patel guiding us. I told them about the phone call. My voice shook, but I told it anyway. She wants the apartment. She wants me to live with her as a day student. I told her no. Now she's mad at me. A boy across the circle, Liam, fiddled with a stress ball. She's making you responsible for her problems, he said quietly. That's not fair. Another girl, Marisol, nodded. My mum did that too when she got divorced. It's not your job to fix their lives. Their words felt like a lifeline. Ms. Patel said gently, children aren't supposed to be their parents' safety net. You're allowed to prioritize your stability. I clung to that sentence. Meanwhile, my dad never pressured me. He didn't ask me to side with him. He didn't badmouth my mum. He just showed up every weekend he could. Sometimes we talked about the future, high school, college, maybe art school if I wanted. He asked about my friends. He asked if I was happy. I realized one evening, sitting on the apartment couch eating takeout with him, that I felt safe. Not just safe from yelling or chaos, but safe to be myself. My stimming, my tangents, my quirks, none of it made him pull away. I thought about telling my mum this, about writing her a letter, but every time I started, the words tangled. What could I even say? I still love you. I still want you in my life. But I'm not willing to give up the one place where I'm thriving to rescue you. It felt too big for paper. Donnie noticed me getting quieter. One night, she climbed onto my bed with a bag of pretzels. You're thinking about your mum again, she said. Yeah, she's an adult. You're a kid, Donnie said Matovec. Adults are supposed to take care of kids, not the other way around. I stared at her. She popped a pretzel in her mouth. That's just how it is, she said. It shouldn't have been a revelation, but it was. I started focusing again on what I could control. I threw myself into art club projects, painting big canvases in the studio. I signed up for the spring swim meet. I helped organize a fundraiser for the library's new sensory-friendly reading room. Each little act was like planting a stake in the ground. This is my life. This is where I belong. My mom still didn't call, but sometimes I sent her texts, short ones. One, my swim meet today. Got an A in English. Miss you. She rarely replied. When she did, it was brief. Good job. Busy right now. The hurt dulled but never vanished. Some nights I lay in the dark, listening to Donnie's steady breathing, and whispered to my stuffed fox. I still wish she wanted me for me, not for money. Saying it out loud made the ache less sharp. Spring turned to summer, then to another school year. I kept thriving. I moved up to advanced art. I started mentoring younger students who were new and overwhelmed, showing them how to use timers and color-coded folders the way Ms. Bennett had shown me. It felt good to give back. One weekend, as my dad and I were walking back from the grocery store to the apartment, he said quietly, "You know, you don't have to feel guilty." I glanced at him. About Mum. About choosing what's best for you. I looked down at my sneakers. It still feels like I'm betraying her. He sighed. When two adults make choices, sometimes kids get caught in the middle. That's not your fault. He paused. I'm proud of you for knowing what you need. Something in me eased a little at his words. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "I'm allowed to choose myself." The letters looked strange, like someone else had written them, but I underlined them anyway. That winter, Ms. Patel asked me if I wanted to share part of my story at a school assembly about resilience. I almost said no. I hated speaking in front of people, but then I thought about the younger kids sitting where I used to sit, scared and overwhelmed. Maybe they needed to hear that it was okay to hold on to what kept you safe. So I stood on stage under the bright lights and told my story. Not all of it, just the parts about failing at my old school, coming here, finding support, learning how to manage my brain. My voice shook, but I got through it. The applause at the end felt like a wave washing over me. Afterward, a 6th grader came up to me and said, "I'm like you. I thought I couldn't do school, but maybe I can." I smiled at him. "You can," I said. That night, I texted my mom again. Spoke at assembly today. Talked about how this school helps me. She didn't reply, but for the first time, it didn't crush me, because the truth was, I wasn't the same girl who'd sat at the kitchen table, gripping the edge of her chair while her parents talked about divorce. I wasn't the girl who thought she had to choose between her own well-being and someone else's crisis. I was still 14, still figuring things out, still missing my mum, but I was also stronger, steadier. I knew where I belonged. Sometimes, late at night, I pictured a future where my mum and I could talk without bitterness, where she could visit me at the apartment without strings attached, where she could be proud of me for surviving and thriving. Maybe that would happen someday. Maybe it wouldn't. But either way, I'd keep choosing the life that let me breathe in therapy. Ms. Patel once told me, loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It means being honest about what you need while still caring about the other person. I carried that sentence with me like a charm in my pocket. So no, I wasn't going to ask my dad to give her the apartment. I wasn't going to trade the stability I'd fought for just to patch a hole in her plans. I still loved her. I still wanted her. But I was learning that loving someone doesn't mean letting them pull you under. When I wrote in my journal at night, I started ending entries with a small declaration. I am not the bad guy for wanting to be okay, because deep down, I knew I wasn't.